Welcome to Happy Times and Places, in which I, Toby Hadoke, try to accentuate the positive when watching an episode of Doctor Who, and I have a special guest who has selected this episode who has a favourite thing about it, and I have to guess what that is.
Hello, I'm Ian McLachlan, and I was delighted when I found the Dalek Masterplan was still available to talk about.
Ho, 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 it's Christmas, except it's not. Whenever you're listening to this, if you're a non-patron, you definitely won't. Well, I don't think you'll be listening to this at Christmas time. I hope not, because that means you'll have had to wait a year for it. Patrons definitely won't. I'd planned to record this around Christmas time. I started my quest for the Daleks Masterplan in the build-up to Christmas, but I record this on the 6th of January, so I missed out on being festive, but it's sort of appropriate because I'm doing Doctor Who's only Christmas special of the classic era. In the first year since Doctor Who came back, that looks like, at the time of recording, we're not going to have a festive season special, so we've already lost the Christmas special. Well, I say lost, but gained the New Year special, but it looks like this year we're not going to have any festive special at all, because at the time of recording, Doctor Who's going to be celebrating the BBC centenary and then not coming back until it celebrates its own 60th birthday. So I suppose appropriate then that well, no, not really. It's not appropriate. I'm doing this now. I'm trying to make sense of the fact that I didn't. My timetable didn't work out as I thought. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the Feast of Stephen. It's a funny old thing. I'm not sure it's funny in the way that it intended. Let's see if I enjoy it. Let's talk through the Feast of Stephen. I am watching it on the Loose Cannon Reconstruction, which you can find in various dark corners of the universe. Or you can just listen along as I talk to the pictures of the reconstruction of this lost episode, which I'm going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. So this always came with this I read about in Doctor Who: A Celebration as this was the first episode of Doctor Who to be destroyed by the BBC, and it almost made it feel quite personal. And it turns out it probably was, although Gavin Rymel has just done a podcast about whether it was likely to be recorded or come back or whatever, because for a while it was suggested this was never even struck a print of this for BBC Enterprises to sell abroad, so therefore it will never come back. And of course, like many things that were stated once somewhere, some people have read that and gone, well, I don't need to look at that any further. It's a great sounding thing. That's it then. I think people have since looked into it and gone, it may not be as simple as that. I'm inclined to think it's extremely unlikely the Feast of Stephen will ever come back, but I'm not going to put it out of the realms of possibility. Partially because I haven't listened to Gav's podcast yet, and partially because I've written a couple of things about. I've read a couple of things and had a couple of discussions about the idea that a viewing print must have been struck of this in order for it to be okayed, because the BBC hierarchy wouldn't be watching on Christmas Day and making notes and all that sort of thing. So anyway, there are various reasons. But yeah, it's the only Doctor Who Christmas special of the classic era. There's a funny cast to it. So Norman Mitchell, playing one of these policemen, is one of those brilliant sort of character comedy actors who appeared in movies and all sorts, but also I believe he used to just hang around the BBC bar and sort of go anything going, and not just the BBC films as well, and was often a day player on movies. He's got one of those great sort of character faces, and seemed to not bother whether he had one line or a major supporting part or whatever, and was just sort of always in work. He was the father of Christopher Mitchell, who was in It Ain't Our Fault Mum, and I think they died within a very short time of each other. I think Christopher sadly predeceased his father. But yeah, Norman Mitchell, as I say, who did movies, is one of the. They had this idea, didn't they, of being very fourth wall breaky, and having the cast of Z Cars in this. And I believe David Rose, the producer of Z Cars, went, "Not on your Nelly." I believe in the book, don't they? Don't they get given the surnames of the actors? So Constable Blessed, which I don't really buy. I think they should have given. I don't know. I'd give them the surnames of the characters from Z Cars. Smith and Weir, Fancy Smith, Jock Weir, etc., etc. Anyway, most of those Z Cars actors did appear in Doctor Who eventually. Stratford Johns, Brian Blessed, Frank Windsor. Joseph Brady, who played Jock Weir, never did. Jeremy Kemp never did, but Jimmy Ellis did. So Z Cars and Doctor Who were eventually kind of intertwined, but not at this period in the show. It would have been a bold manoeuvre and I think Doctor Who could probably stand it perhaps more than Z Cars, which considered itself very, which was gritty and down to earth and realistic and urban and but then again, Doctor Who is, I know it's for children, but it's ambitious and it has pretensions for space opera or serious historical. Well, it's a weird hybrid of a show, isn't it? Because we've just had the Mythmakers, which is definitely deliberately funny. That's the wonderful thing about the show is that it can sustain being a literary comedy. With classical references one week and then a pulpy space adventure the next. And then within that pulpy space adventure, an interminable sequence of a man talking about his house disappearing and it's his greenhouse and talking about the revels. And it's Reg Pritchard who plays Ben Dahir in The Crusade, which allows for a joke that Hartnell's doing now that is an addition to the rehearsal script. You can sort of see where they've taken bits out and they've added with a different typewriter. And so Hartnell or Camfield, because Douglas Camfield would have cast Reg Pritchard, somebody adds the sequence where Hartnell goes, "I know you from somewhere," and he goes, "Where?" "A marketplace in Jaffa," because he played Ben Dahir in The Crusade. So that's very much I know we break the fourth wall at the end, but that is very much a meta Doctor Who's first meta joke. They're very rare things, and I rather like that. It's bizarre because nobody had access to cast lists. Nobody would remember. Andy was had a beard and was essentially blacked up and had a turban on in The Crusade, and presumably was not he's Man in Macintosh in the Daleks Masterplan, and yet they throw that gag in. I don't know if that's madness, but I like it. It's brilliant, but it's because it's the sort of thing that appeals to somebody who reads cast lists and likes spotting people in things, but I'm not sure in 1965 anybody was paying that close attention after several months. But hey, I'm gives me something wonderful to talk about. I love it. Reg Pritchard, and he was one of those actors that did, crops up in Doctor Who twice in very quick succession, and then you sort of go, I wonder what ever became of him. And then he dies in 2013, and it's announced, and you go, I wonder what he was up to, because nobody ever interviewed him. I don't know if my friend Ben Jolly wrote to him, but you sort of do think, what lives did these people have, and why didn't we find them? And that's the same with a lot of the cast of this, actually, as we will discover when I run out of things to talk about and try and impress you with arcane facts. But it's a terrible sequence because of course, Terry Nation was a writer of comedy, famously was writing for Tony Hancock before he got fired. Real kudos to Peter Purvis here for his Liverpudlian accent, which I think he really sustains very nicely and does well. And Actually, I don't think any of the others are doing Liverpudlian accents. Jim Sankster, who will be listening. Hello, Jim. I adore you, even though I disagreed with something that you said when I was doing my last AMA. But we're allowed to disagree, aren't we? He may have missed that because he might not have listened, and now because he's listened to this, he's now going to go and listen. Anyway, Jim. I adore Jim. He's a great cultural historian, one builder of wonderful models. Excellent guest on this, where he chose the Cave People episodes. But Jim is also from Liverpool and knows a lot about different Scouse accents and will speak far more eloquently, albeit in a Scouse accent, than I, about Scouse accents and their depictions on television, and that the Scouse accent was bred from various Lancastrian things all coming together and blah blah blah. Anyway, so, and I think he said to me in a message the other day that Purvis is the only one doing a sort of proper Scouse accent, and the others are all doing sort of various different northern ones. Clifford Earle, who plays the station sergeant, that's just a normal sort of Lancastrian accent, isn't it, that Norman Mitchell's doing. Clifford Earle, who plays the station sergeant, better known, he was really called Ken Earle, but he was one of the soldiers who was experimented upon at Porton Down when a soldier died, actually. And Ken/Clifford campaigned for the rest of his life to get justice for those men who suffered terrible health consequences and fallout as a result of that. He pops up again. Camfield cast him as a military man in The Invasion as Major Branwell, and a relative of Clifford's, Robert Faulkner. I don't know if he's a relative, but I think he might have been a relative or knew him. Who's the guard in Utopia? Said, "Oh, you should do Clifford Earle for Who's Round?" I was like, "Absolutely." And then he went, "Oh, actually, he's just died." So I never got to the bottom of how Robert knew him. But anyway, have a swinging time. I like that. They're a good. I mean, it's of a particular type. The two constables played by Norman Mitchell, and the other one's Malcolm Rogers, who's Dracula in The Chase, still about. Long career. I saw him on stage in The Crucible at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. Still, 50 years in the business, working away. This is Ken Earle, Clifford Earle, and Ken Thornett's the inspector, isn't he? But I like the rather sweet exchange between Norman Mitchell and Sarah Kingdom, Jean Marsh, and he says, "Go on, have a swinging time." I think that's very sweet. There's a lot longer at the police station than I thought, which is no bad thing, because it gets very strange later on, or maybe it doesn't. But this is so far so Christmas fair, a series of misunderstandings, and none of the danger is sort of life threatening. It's all very much of a caper, which is fine. They brazenly paper over the cliffhanger that was left last week and just go, "Oh yeah, it was." It's the air's a bit mucky. Don't come out unless you have to. Oh well, we have to. Oh well, there we go. Let's forget about it then. And even in the incidental music's getting in on the act. And so the policemen watch the TARDIS dematerialise. Did they have a reaction? There we go. It's gone. Yeah, he's not being scarce either. Oh. Yeah, so I missed that punchline, whatever Norman Mitchell said when it vanished, but none of the punchlines are great in this, I have to say. It's well, it just goes to show, and this is not to criticize, because as time moves on, comedy tastes change, and dare I say it, comedy, gets more sophisticated. But that said, there is some comedy of course, from the 60s that stands up brilliantly today. I don't think this does. So but you have to be careful judging comedy from the past for many reasons. Sometimes for reasons of taste, but sometimes for reasons of audience expectation. And I'm certainly not a comedy snob. I mean, I talking of Christmas comedy, I find Mrs. Brown's Boys fairly hateful, but I would never. But it's extremely popular, and I would never criticise anybody that makes something that is watched by gazillions of people that people like an awful lot, just because I don't like it, because it's a skill. However, I don't think this went down particularly well at the time, and it gets very loud from now on. The reconstruction is using the face of Alan Buller from Talons of Weng Chiang with an added moustache to stand in for Leonard Graham playing Darcy Tranton, who's the baddie with the buzzsaw, threatening Blossom Lefebvre, played by Sheila Dunn, who better known as Sheila Camfield. So Douglas Camfield's got his wife. No, not better known. She's better known as Sheila Dunn. She was Sheila Camfield. She was Douglas Camfield's wife. So the gag here is that they've landed in a Hollywood studio, but they have mistaken an attempted murder by buzzsaw, circular saw, of Blossom Lefebvre by Darcy Tranton. That's a good name, actually, for a moustache-twirling villain. And I do like... I'd forgotten about these, and so the hunt was on. I do like the silent movie captions. Again, if the comedy is weak, which it sort of is here, MJ Matthews here as Charlie Chaplin, so they see Charlie Chaplin, which is quite funny. And I'd forgotten when I was talking about MJ Matthews being one of the delegates in episode 3, and Jack LaWhite is the other one. Jack LaWhite's in this as an extra as well. So those two extras from episode 3 are here. And we got, this is where we get difficulties with some of the actors. David James as the Adam Sheikh, as the Arab Sheikh, not the same as the football goalkeeper, although sometimes historical research and scholarship with Doctor Who is, I'm surprised there isn't a website that claims that David James, the footballer, was in an episode of Doctor Who that was made probably before he was born. And Ingmar Knörpf here, that's the joke. He's not called Knopf, he's called Knörpf. That's the joke that they do a lot, I seem to recall. Is supposed to be this temperamental European shouty director, and you've got Steinberger P. Green here, played by Royston Tickner, and they yell at each other. There's a lot of yelling from now on. It's very difficult to know quite what's going on, but the comedy is, I would say, not of the subtle, dry aside variety. It's been very well put together by Loose Cannon here, considering the paucity of material available. But Ingmar Knörpf is played by Mark Ross. So David James, Mark Ross, these are common words and names, and it means we don't really know much about those actors, sadly. And there's a high percentage of the actors in this who... and I'd have included Leonard Graham amongst those, but then I remember thinking, Leonard Graham really should look for him. And then suddenly his death was announced, I think, in the stage in 2000. And again, here's another one. You go, I wonder what he was doing. Theatre was his love, it says in his stage. It's just a death notice. It's not an obituary. And the assistant director is Conrad Monk. Now, I do know about Conrad Monk, who I hope is still alive. There's a Keystone Cops sequence here, which has been done very well in the reconstruction. Conrad Monk was an actor who does this Doctor Who, does bits of Bob's Atelier in the 60s, but he then founded a shop that started making doors and door knockers, and he called the shop Knobs and Knockers. He set it up with another actor, I think a guy called Bob Jennings, in the early 70s, and Knobs and Knockers was a going concern. Is it? And I think that's him. I think that's Conrad Monk. I'm sure he plays the assistant director, yeah. And he had this shop called Dobbs and Knockers, and I think it was a chain. I think there was certainly more than one of them, and I believe he sold the business and became a multi-millionaire. There are a few actors like that in Doctor. I think Tito from the 10th Planet also became a multi-millionaire from selling antiques and stuff like that. But I'll talk about him when I get to the 10th Planet. But I love this idea that, and I think Conrad Monk might still be out there. Do you know him? If you do, put me in touch. I'd love to tell the story of somebody who's got one appearance in a very odd episode of Doctor Who, who then, you know, and I think the fact he called his shop Knobs and Knockers, which is a better joke than any of the jokes in the Feast of Stephen. but Ingmar Knopf is quite a big part, and he's this, you know, absurd caricature of a European director. But don't know anything about Mark Ross, who plays him. But Hartnell dives into this with great aplomb. To his credit, they all do, actually, the three regulars. Paula Topham as the vamp, yeah. She was still in Spotlight in the 80s, I'm sure. But again, I don't know what became of her. I mean, it's just a sea of noise, isn't it? It's really, really tricky to discern. So what has happened to Stephen? It's ironic that this is a play on words, the Feast of Stephen, but of course Stephen is spelt with a V, whereas I think the proper Feast of Stephen is spelt with a PH. Considering, I'm sure in Terry Nation's draft scripts for this, he spells Stephen with a PH, so he wouldn't have even been aware of the joke. A strange man keeps. I mean, that's gonna. If you're in any doubt that we're watching a Doctor episode from the olden days, that might be a bit problematic. Sarah's got the line, and a man keeps telling me to take my clothes off, and the Doctor says we've got to get out of here. It's all full of Arabs. I mean, there we go. That's yeah. The past is another country where people who were from another country were played by white actors in problematic makeup. From the pictures, we have a few pictures. They're not telesnaps, but there's one that I'm looking at right now, which is Blossom Lefevre with her mascara cascading down her face. And they were taken by Robert Jewell, who's the Dalek operator. Who has a week off being a Dalek operator and is given a little character plot playing the clown. He's credited as Bing Crosby in some internet resources, but the gag is he's credited as the clown, and he says within the dialogue that he's Bing Crosby. So the chase was on. No, it's not. That was on last year. He said, escaping from the fact that I just got a little bit pedantic there about going, he shouldn't be credited as Bing Crosby on internet resources because his character is clown, even though he is Bing Crosby. Shut up, Toby. And so here we have, Robert Jewell, the Australian actor Robert Jewell, who was playing as only ever, hidden in a Dalek costume. Later, he's a Macra as well. But Douglas Camfield, as he so often did, somebody that's either an extra or a small part player, or in Robert Jewell's case, a Dalek, is given just a little moment in the spotlight. And as a result, Robert Jewell got his camera out on Christmas Day and took invaluable off-screen stills from an episode that was never repeated, never sold. There have been now some photos that have turned up of certainly of Gene Marsh on the set, because you can see the buzzsaw and the circular saw and the Hollywood studio set and some of it in the background. But certainly the first photos and only visual record of Feast of Stephen that I saw for many, many years were these snatched photos that were shown in DWB, and DWB was a very interesting, because it was quite tabloidy in the way that it presented itself, and let's not get into the fact that they didn't like John Nathan Turner and stuff like that, but they got these pictures off Robert Jewell and said, and this is amazing because these are photos taken off air and we got them from Australia and the episode was never shown in Australia. Now they knew that the episode was shown in England when the off-screen stills were taken, and they were taken from that viewing. But don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. So then there's a little bit of buzz going, oh, but does that mean that it could exist somewhere in Australia? No, it doesn't. I may have misremembered that, but I'm sure there was something in the article that sort of, you know, didn't disclose the whole truth in order to make it seem a bit of a sexier proposition than it actually was. I may have misremembered that, but I don't know. But I don't think I have. Now, the reconstruction has used pictures of William Hartnell from This Sporting Life to play Professor Webster, who the Doctor is mistaken for, because they couldn't find anything else out about the actor Albert Barrington. And Gavin Reimel asked me if I knew anything about him, and I didn't. But then somebody else chimed in, I've forgotten who, and said that actually Barrington might well have been a neighbour of Camfield, because Camfield uses him in a Z cars as well. But he doesn't seem to have any record with Equity or with any actor's agent. He's never in any spotlight. So whilst Camfield will also, promote extras, he also might have given his mate a job. Which also makes him a bit of a union buster as well. But let's not get into that. A happy Christmas to all of you at home, says William Hartnell. Sometimes claim that was an ad-lib that they could do nothing about. It was recorded on the 3rd of December. It was broadcast on the 25th of December. If they hadn't liked it, they would have had plenty of opportunity not to do anything with it. It's a big old cast for seeing as last week we only had the Daleks, Marvick, Chen and the regulars. Prop man Buddy Windrush is Brian Moseley, of course, who was Alf Roberts in Coronation Street and turns up later in this story as Malfa, but as Brian Moseley. And Steve Makin as the cameraman, who is another one that I've not been able to find anything out about. So it's a really interesting cast of regular old faces to curious people who had interest. Well, look, this is why I'm drawn to the actors. There's always something to find out, and because people are interesting, there's always something interesting to find out. Well, it interests me, and if it doesn't interest you, well, you knew what you came here for. I don't quite know what you came here for, but I'm grateful that you did. So, the Feast of Stephen. Hartnell breaking the fourth wall. It's an inconvenient thing, isn't it? Because it means that Doctor Who knows he's being watched on the television. But I have seen many different explanations for that. It could be him flirting with the master of the land of fiction. It could be him knowing that somebody is watching on the space-time telegraph. Whatever you want. It's whatever you want it to be. I did get asked the other day in the AMA, non-patrons, if you are a patron, there's a monthly Ask Me Anything, where people ask me good questions and I drone on forever. And it's one of the perks, apparently. Whether I liked Hartnell breaking the fourth wall, and I'm quite pleased with my answer, in that I hate the fact that I don't like it, but I'm glad that he did it. I don't like it, but I'm glad that it exists in the canon of Doctor Who. So I don't approve of it. I don't think it's right that the actor playing Doctor Who, or indeed anybody, should talk to the audience watching at home, because that immediately says we're now in a fiction. But I'm glad, as and I don't mean this word loftily, but as an historian of Doctor Who, as somebody interested in the history of the show and the making of the show, I'm glad that it exists as something we can talk about and get furious about and argue about and come up with theories about and have to wade through documentation about to see if Donald Tosh was right when he said that Hartnell just did it and they were all furious. That's not true. And it is in the rehearsal script in that added type. I said in the AMA, Donald Tosh always said, but that was because that was added to that to reflect what was actually done on the floor. No. If they hadn't wanted it in, they would easily have not had it in. And Wiles was not averse to not letting Hartnell do what he wanted to do, as we will discover as we go on. It's a silly Christmas romp. but I quite enjoyed chatting about it. But I remember when I listened to it, when I first got the soundtrack, listening to it, and it's just loads of yelling. I didn't even mention much about Royston Tickner, did I? Who turns up later, because Michael Brant's production assistant on this. Michael Brant was good friends with Royston Tickner, who plays Mr. Robbins, the boatman in episode 1 of The Sea Devils, and was indeed a great man of the sea, which is why he and Michael Brant are friends, because Mike Bryant is a great man of the sea. I think I talk about Royston to Michael in my Who's Round. So, and he had a very interesting career that he dropped out of acting, and I think he was a publican and a miner, and you can see him playing both of those parts as well as being one in real life. Anyway, the episode stopped. I don't have to dazzle you with actor facts. It's a funny old thing, the Feast of Stephen. I worried I wouldn't have much to say. And it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to see how the Keystone Cop sequence worked, because Camfield we think of as being an action director, but he's a good director. So to go all out on an episode that's a caper, that's a bit meta, that's a bit daft, that's a bit pop will eat itself, and all of that, I think is a really, really interesting prospect, even though I think the scripted comedy is poor, and some of that sort of playing of they've taken my greenhouse or whatever is a little bit sort of dated and of its time, and by of its time I mean of the lower end of the quality of comedy from the time, because there's lots of 60s comedy that's great, that really stands up today, and I don't think the Feast of Stephen is an example of that, and nor would you expect it to be. It's a Christmas Day episode of Doctor Who. It's not Galton and Simpson or Johnny Spate or anybody from the 60s cream of comedy working to the Doctor Who format. Now that would have been interesting if Nation had gone to his pals at Associated London Scripts and said, Spike, or Eric Sykes or any of those people, can you do this week's Doctor Who? Just muck about. So long as they start in somewhere where you can't breathe the air, although actually you don't even need to worry about that, and it ends with Doctor Who wishing everyone happy Christmas, do what you like. Could have a cast of thousands. I think Norman Mitchell's been seen up in the BBC bar. He's got nothing to do. Now that would have been interesting. But I think the comedy in a lot of that proves why Terry Nation was better off writing about ray guns and Daleks. But I quite enjoyed being there while that was on. It's like many a Doctor Who Christmas special. You're trying to watch it and some git's talking all the way through it. I'm not usually the git. I'm usually the person getting annoyed. What's my favourite thing about that? I'm going to say the sort of meta elements, and I'm in danger of sounding very pretentious. That ship may well have sailed. I think that may have sailed and collided with up your own iceberg as well. But I love the You're in a Marketplace in Jaffa joke, just because it's mind-boggling, but I'm really pleased it exists. But because it doesn't work for anybody there at the time, but it absolutely works for me, who was born 10 years after it was shown. And I'm and Doctor Who fans and those people, many of whom there are a legion who exist now, who didn't then and wouldn't have been sort of conceived to do so. But the silent movie captions as well, and the fact that it's got the fact that they land in a movie set and they think it's a movie set, and all of and the fact that it could almost have been the Zcast cast, So I know I'm eulogizing things that didn't actually happen, but just the whole quest to be a little bit. And I suppose the Doctor wishing happy Christmas is part of that, but as I say, I don't actually like that as a moment, because it makes the whole fragile fiction of Doctor Who that has to be held together, because there's so many unbelievable things. You have to make it real to make it to stop the whole house of cards from falling down. And yet, as I say, I am interested in the fact that it exists, that it was let through, that whatever reason, whoever decided that should happen. I suppose it could have been that Hartnell insisted, and they decided not to fight that battle on the rehearsal floor that afternoon and let it go. So there might be an element of truth in what Donald Tosh was saying. Who knows? And the fact that when Robert Jewell was snapping away, he actually got that moment as well, which I'm delighted about, because it is a key, interesting moment of Doctor Who. And despite the fact that it doesn't exist, and it was unlikely to exist because it was junked so early and blah blah blah, that nonetheless, that was the episode that was being photographed because there happened to be that actor who happened to never have his face on screen. But this episode he was going to have it on, so he decided to take some photos. And even though he took most of the photos he took of his small bits, he took some photos of the other bits as well. When you could say, well, he's just getting used to framing up so that when he came along, but then he'd gone and he still took a couple more photos. And one of those photos was of the moment that Doctor Who raises his glass to the screen to wish us happy Christmas in that moment that is sort of famously good, bad, controversial, whatever you want it to be. So I love all of that. I thought and it's not an episode I would ever have said I liked, The Feast of Stephen, but just sitting here at 2:00 in the morning with Christmas gone, and Christmas has come and gone, and that's another Christmas out the way, and it's always a bit of an anticlimax. So I was a bit blue this morning when I woke up, because Christmas comes, and you go, oh, but at least we got New Year. Then New Year goes, and I go, at least I've got my birthday, which is on the 2nd of January. And then that goes, and then I go, oh, well, that's it for the rest of the year then, isn't it? So I'm always a bit blue of this sort of week, the post-Christmas blues. And actually, it's been a nice little coda to a Christmas time that came and went all too quickly. So, a merry rest of the year. Is it happy, or is it? Does he say happy Christmas or happy Christmas to all of you? He says happy Christmas. It's one of those blind spots that I have, because I quite often I present on the radio at this time of year, and I always go, oh, I'll sign off by going, and then I go, is it happy? Is it merry? Is it happy? It's a bit like me with Nightmare on Eden, or whether it's the Sunmakers or the Sunmakers, which are things that I should know and have, but just for somehow always contrive to, just before I decide I know the answer, scramble my brain. But I think it's a happy post-Christmas. As I say, if you're a non-patron, you're probably listening to this in, I don't know, April, May, June, July. But look, a happy any time of year. I'm allowed to break the fourth wall and say happy times and places to all of you at home. Oh, hang on. I haven't got so carried away with doing a good out. And I was pleased with that, because sometimes you hear me straining to go, what's my sign-off? It's got to be something apposite and apt and perhaps a bit of wordplay. I strain at the bit. I haven't actually done what I'm supposed to do, which is get Ian McLachlan's favourite bit. I've got the fact that it's all meta. I'm going to have to come up with a good exit now as well. Oh, well, at least you could tell it's live. It's not live. I could actually just muck about with it in the edit. But I try and keep the edit. It doesn't matter. What does Ian McLachlan like about the Christmas special episode, The Feast of Stephen?
And then we come to The Feast of Stephen, the famous Christmas episode. I remember watching it. I remember where I was when I watched it. I remember feeling that it was different. I was a bit disappointed there was no Daleks in it. But in typical Doctor Who fashion, there was at least one strange thing in it. And that was not the Doctor wishing everybody at home a happy Christmas, though I admit that could have been one of my favourite scenes. It was the reveal that the clown that you saw, played by Robert Jewell, who I knew had had been inside the Daleks before, he was a clown, but he was going to change from being a clown to being a singer to being Bing Crosby. And that was something that you didn't really expect. even in the sort of flippant, more humorous Doctor Who episode, there was what a thread that runs through all Doctor Who is that it's not ever quite what you expect. There's a police box, but it's not a police box at all. It's a space-time machine. And there's other things that the ordinary becomes the slightly unusual. So that, I would say, would be my favourite moment on the Feast of Stephen.
Actually, that's a great choice. And you see, I'm not saying the wood for the trees. I was so annoyed, not really annoyed, but that Robert Jewell played Bing Crosby in the Daleks Masterplan, as you might see online. I don't know if you'd even do see that online, but I'm sure you do. Whereas it's better if he is if you come to it and he's clown, because then yes, the end of the gag is he's going to become Bing Crosby, and that's lovely because it then defers a bit of grandeur onto Funny Old Doctor Who because it's got Bing Crosby in it, and it's a nice little reveal. And Ian's very cleverly tied it in with other elements of Doctor Who, where something that seems quite ordinary is something extraordinary, and the Bing Crosby gag, and it is actually one of the nicer gags because it's not really a joke. It's just a sweet moment actually. But I like Ian tying it in with something ordinary actually being something a bit more special. And yes, of course, because I forgot because Chaplin's in it. I didn't forget Bing Crosby was in it, but I sort of saw it as the same thing. But actually, Chaplin, I think, is just a visual gag, isn't he? When the actor comes out and waddles off. I once auditioned to play Charlie Chaplin in an advert, and my friend Steve Royal, who's since gone on to do brilliantly on Britain's Got Talent, he turned up as well, and he's got a bit more. He's got the hair. I thought Steve stood a bit more of a chance just because he looked a bit more like Chaplin, and that's fine because you go, oh, well, a mate will get it. And then we were both chatting, and I went, oh, you got this, mate. You look much better. And then a bloke walked in dressed as Charlie Chaplin, and we both just looked at each other and went, why did we even come? So I hope that MJ Matthews, when he auditioned, he won't have auditioned. It just comes through an extras agency. But I wonder if he took the Chaplin costume with him. So there we go. Well, that's the end of the Feast of Stephen, and so I'm going to now go and have the Gaviscon of Stephen because I've probably overindulged. That's nothing like as good as a payoff as the one I did before, but there we go. Thanks very much for listening / watching, and I will see you in a volcano, which you'll definitely need some Gaviscon to cool down the fires of that. And volcano, yeah. I'm a bit nervous about that one. Okay, till next time, bye. Well, ding dong merrily on Happy Times and Places, which was presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest is Ian K. McLachlan. I would very much like to thank the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Christopher Joyce, Judith Jackson, William Keith, Matthew Kilburn, Andy Kitching, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Andrew Lester, Andrew Llewellyn, Jacob Lumley, Nate Lynch, Darryl McLean, Philip Marsh, Glenn MacLeod, Pip Maidley, Steve Manfred, Nick Mellish, James Miller, Justin E. Monaghan, Chris Murphy, Tom Neenan, Jeremiah O'Connor, Mark Trevor Owen, Russell Parker, Phil Pascoe, Richard Patey, Ken Patterson, Thomas Payne, John Pettigrew, Fnord Prefect, Liam Price, Corridors, Rachel T.S., Peter Reed, and Paula Reynolds. The music for these podcasts is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to join that list of patrons, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Oh my goodness, what waits for you there? Well, probably another 4 months worth of releases. So, if you're not a patron, what you're listening to in 4 months' time is available right now, and everything between then and now as well. So a lot of extra material that you get much, much earlier, and there's also exclusive material and sort of special access, if you like. I mean, just in terms of sort of chat and questions and AMA and funny little bits and bobs. So there's no was going to say no physical access there, but that. I think you get the drift. I don't think I need to stipulate how close you're allowed to get for threepence. Well, it's £3. £3 a month is the lowest tier. It goes right up. There's no limit. But you can even get a discount on the £3 a month if you go for a year in one go when you get 10% off. So that's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. Those of you who don't fancy the monthly commitment can do one-off donations at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke if you have an episode that you particularly like, or if I sound particularly needy during one of them. Thank you so much. And I know that times are tough, but what costs you absolutely nothing is to go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and to give these 5 stars. 5 stars really helps to separate us from the crowd. Say us. Sounds like there's a team. We're beavering away making these. It's just me. Can you tell? Yeah. 5 stars and a couple of lines of review, which really helps to polish our algorithms, make them fire on all cylinders. Do algorithms have cylinders? I don't know, but just do that. That'd be nice. They've stalled a bit recently, so if you haven't yet rated these on iTunes, if you please can, but 5 stars please, and a couple of lovely lines of review really help. And also come to my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, every Tuesday at 8 p.m. in Manchester, and it's monthly on the first Sunday of every month, twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. I'm actually trying to time these to the music. I have the music tracks laid at various intervals, and there I could see it coming. And I said Excess Malarkey just as the music kicked in. So I'm very proud of that, but you can't see that achievement unless I talk you through it, which I just have. So there we go. So this episode won't be out anywhere near Christmas, which seems a shame. I'm not very good at planning things, but whenever you're listening to this, I hope you're having a merry one at home. And what I'm going to claim in years and years to come is that it had never been planned that I said what I just said now, and then I did it at the last minute, and nobody could do anything to stop me. And we'll start another myth surrounding sign-offs to do with the Feast of Stephen. I'm actually in that just sort of post Christmas, as I record these sort of outros and stuff, in the sort of post-Christmas lull. It's a reminder. January can be sort of dark, and you feel like it's a bit of a sense of anticlimax, isn't there? That you've got to sort of start the year from scratch. So I'm doing that whilst looking at the matchmakers that never got opened over Christmas and thinking, well, somebody's got to eat them. And sure, my partner isn't actually allowed any refined sugar, and nor is the dog. So it's going to be me, isn't it? I suspect this old stomach of mine won't be wearing a bit thin for quite a while. Oh well, there we go. That was the Feast of Stephen. Not a sign of good King Wenceslas. That was their Mr. Trick there, didn't they?